Paul Hackett is an ordinary office worker trapped in a life that feels painfully repetitive. Even the new trainee he is teaching complains that he does not want to spend his future stuck behind the same desk every day. Unlike the trainee, he has no girlfriend waiting for him at home. He is single, lonely, and desperate for something different. One evening, while reading alone at a diner, he is approached by a strange but charming woman named Marcy. The two quickly strike up a conversation about books, and Marcy eventually joins him at his table. She points out the cashier, who keeps performing odd pirouettes behind the counter, and they share a quiet laugh together. Paul offers to buy her a coffee, but Marcy says she has to leave for her friend's loft downtown. Before going, she casually mentions that her friend Kiki is a sculptor who makes paperweights and indirectly gives Paul her phone number in case he wants to buy one. The moment Marcy walks away, Paul borrows a pen from the cashier and quickly writes down the number. Later that night, he calls under the excuse of buying a paperweight. Marcy sounds happy to hear from him and immediately invites him to the loft. Not wanting to waste the opportunity, Paul hails a cab and tells the driver to hurry. But during the ride, disaster strikes. As he places his only $20 bill in the change tray, a gust of wind blows it out of the window. By the time the cab reaches downtown, he has no money left to pay. Paul apologizes repeatedly, but the driver does not believe his story and angrily speeds away. Still, Paul manages to find the building. Marcy is out at a nearby pharmacy, leaving Kiki alone in the loft, working on a disturbing papier-mâché sculpture of a screaming man. Kiki asks Paul to help apply another layer to the sculpture while she takes a short break. Just then, Marcy calls to say she will be back soon, leaving Paul with no choice but to help. While listening to Kiki chat, he accidentally gets paste all over his shirt. Kiki tells him to wash it and hands him something else to wear. Paul notices that Kiki's shoulders seem sore from working, so he offers her a massage. He flirts a little, complimenting her figure, and the conversation flows easily until Kiki eventually falls asleep on the sofa. At that exact moment, Marcy rushes back into the loft and finds Kiki sleeping beside him. Concerned, she pulls Paul into her bedroom and directly asks what happened. After hearing his honest explanation, Marcy relaxes again. She tells him she is glad he came and heads off for a shower, admitting that she feels unusually good tonight. Then, at exactly 1:40 a.m., the phone rings. A man named Greg asks Paul to tell Marcy that he called. Paul takes the message, but as he hangs up, he notices Kiki watching him without a bra. Once Kiki leaves the room, Paul's curiosity starts to grow. He quietly looks through Marcy's bag and discovers a tube of burn ointment. He quickly puts it back just as Marcy returns. She asks him to wait a little longer, grabs the ointment, and leaves the room again, only making Paul feel even more confused. Marcy returns wearing a robe, and the atmosphere between them becomes more intimate. But when Paul leans in to kiss her, she gently pulls away and says she would rather talk for now. Paul mentions Greg's phone call, and Marcy casually explains that Greg is a friend who constantly complains about his boyfriend. Still, Paul senses that she is hiding something and carefully asks what is wrong. After a long pause, Marcy reveals a disturbing story. Years earlier, she was terrorized in this very room by an ex-boyfriend who climbed through the fire escape and held her at knife point for 6 hours. Just then, the phone starts ringing again. The sound fills the apartment, making both of them freeze. Neither of them answers it, and they sit quietly until the ringing finally stops. Wanting to escape the uneasy mood, Marcy suggests going out for coffee so they can talk somewhere more comfortably. While she changes her clothes, Paul notices a $20 bill stuck to Kiki's sculpture. He tries to pull it free, but Marcy returns before he can take it. Paul asks about the name Franklin on the building buzzer. Marcy decides not to hide anything anymore. Franklin is her husband, and the apartment belongs to him. She explains that they were only married for a few days. Franklin was obsessed with the Wizard of Oz, and his strange behavior quickly ended the relationship. Yet somehow Marcy claims they still write letters to each other every day. Confused by the contradictions, Paul apologizes for asking so many questions and pays for their coffee. Fortunately, the waiter knows Marcy and lets them leave without paying. Back at the loft, the two finally kiss. But in the middle of the moment, Marcy suddenly breaks down in tears. While Kiki comforts her, Paul notices a book lying nearby. Curious, he flips through it and discovers page after page of graphic photographs showing severe burn victims. He slams the book shut and asks Marcy for some marijuana to calm his nerves. But he soon realizes she lied about that too.
This isn't Colombian. what the guy who sold to me said it was.
Well, the guy who sold it to you is a liar. So are you.
Are you all right?
Frustration starts building inside him. He demands to see the paperweights Marcy mentioned earlier. The moment she goes into Kiki's room to get them, Paul quickly slips out of the apartment. With only 97 cents left in his pocket, he rushes to the subway station, hoping to get home. Instead, he learns that the fare has just increased to $1.50 after midnight. No matter how much he argues with the attendant, the rules do not change. Out of options, Paul tries to jump over the turnstile, but a police officer spots him immediately, forcing him back up the stairs and into the cold, rainy night. Soaked by the rain, Paul ducks into a nearby bar to dry off. He asks the waitress, Julie, if he can stay for a while, explaining that he only has 97 cents left. Julie does not mind, but she leaves a note on his table that reads, "Help. I hate this job." She stares at him with obvious desperation, making Paul even more uncomfortable. Trying to avoid the awkward situation, he moves to the bar and explains how he missed the last train. The bartender, Tom, sympathizes with him and offers to lend him enough money for a subway ride. Unfortunately, cash register jams and refuses to open. Tom comes up with another solution. If Paul goes to his apartment and retrieves a spare key, he will pay for a taxi home. But Tom immediately changes his mind, realizing he barely knows Paul and worrying he could be a thief. Paul insists he only wants to get home and offers his own apartment keys as collateral. Eventually, Tom agrees and carefully explains where the spare key is hidden and how to disable the alarm system. Paul arrives at the apartment without any trouble. Relieved to be alone for a moment, he washes up in the bathroom. But his bad luck strikes again. When he flushes a tissue down the toilet, it overflows immediately, forcing him to leave in a hurry. On his way out, two neighbors stop him and mistake him for a burglar. Paul nervously shows them the keys, and only after hearing his explanation do they apologize. They warn him that a series of burglaries has recently put everyone in the neighborhood on edge. Walking back toward the bar, Paul notices two men loading Kiki's sculpture into a van. Thinking it is being stolen, he shouts at them. The men panic, drop everything, and speed away. Then Paul notices Kiki nearby, tied up and gagged. Assuming she is the victim of a robbery, he carries the heavy sculpture all the way back to her loft and unties her. Only then does he learn the truth. The men, Neil and Pepe, had legally bought the sculpture, and Kiki had tied herself up as part of a game. Just then, Kiki's boyfriend arrives and blames Paul for ruining everything. Feeling embarrassed and guilty, Paul goes to Marcy's room to apologize. He finds her lying quietly in bed and tries to explain why he acted so strangely earlier. But Marcy says nothing. Growing uneasy, Paul reaches for her hand and realizes she is cold. Marcy is dead. An empty bottle of sleeping pills lies beside her. Panicked, Paul calls for Kiki and tries to help, but she has already left a note with the address of Club Berlin, asking Marcy to join her if she changes her mind. With no other choice, Paul calls the police and carefully explains how to find the apartment. Sitting beside Marcy, he finally understands that she was never as strange or frightening as he imagined. She was simply lonely, just like him. Paul returns to the bar to give Tom back his keys, only to find the place already closed. Julie invites him to wait at her apartment until Tom comes back. With nowhere else to go, Paul reluctantly agrees. Completely unaware of everything Paul has been through that night, Julie celebrates quitting her job by playing music and trying to lift the mood. But the pressure of the evening finally becomes too much for Paul, and he suddenly breaks down in tears. Julie changes the record and asks him what is wrong. Paul avoids the question. All he wants is to get home. As Julie talks about her life, she carefully sketches his portrait. But when Paul accidentally slips out a dismissive word, Julie immediately bursts into tears, wondering why everyone always blames her. Not wanting another emotional disaster, Paul quickly apologizes and manages to calm her down. Julie asks him to touch her stiff beehive hairstyle as a sign of affection. At that exact moment, Tom unlocks the bar downstairs, giving Paul the perfect chance to escape. Julie lets him go easily after Paul promises he will be back in 2 minutes, right after he retrieves his apartment keys. When Paul enters the bar, Tom admits he has already been to his apartment. Since Paul never returned, Tom started to suspect he was a burglar. Paul apologizes and begs him not to ask any questions. Just then, Tom receives a phone call about Marcy's death. Only then does Paul realize that Tom was Marcy's boyfriend.
Marcy.
Shocked and overwhelmed with guilt, Paul rushes back to Julie's apartment. Fortunately, she is fine. In fact, she is excited because he kept his promise and returned. She kisses him and proudly gives him a gift, one of Kiki's paperweights. The moment Paul sees it, his mood changes completely. He promises Julie he will come back again later, but when she tries to hand him the paperweight, he pushes it away and quickly leaves. By the time he reaches the street, the bar is closed once more. His nightmare is far from over. Outside Tom's building, Neil and Pepe are loading stolen goods into their van. At the same moment, the suspicious neighbors spot Paul again and immediately assume he is the burglar they have been searching for. With no time to explain himself, Paul runs. He ducks into the diner to hide, but the restroom is for paying customers only. Even though he has almost no money left, he orders food just to stay inside. Then he comes up with another idea. He lies to the cashier, saying he will be back and heads for Club Berlin, hoping to find Kiki. At the entrance, the bouncer refuses to let him in because it is Mohawk night and only people with the right hairstyle are allowed inside. Desperate, Paul pleads with him, insisting that it is an emergency. Eventually, the bouncer gives in and leads him backstage. But instead of taking him to Kiki, he brings Paul to another employee who is shaving customers' heads. Realizing what is happening, Paul refuses and pushes his way into the club. Paul finally spots Kiki and tries to warn her, shouting that Marcy is dead and that Neil and Pepe are thieves. But the music is too loud, and nobody can hear him. Security drags him back and starts shaving his head. But before they finish, he breaks free and escapes into the streets once again. Thinking quickly, Paul returns to the loft and pulls the $20 bill from the sculpture. For the first time all night, it feels like his luck might finally be changing. He waves down a taxi, but just as he reaches the door, a passenger swings it open and slams it into his arm. As if the night could not get any worse, the driver turns out to be the same cab driver from earlier. The driver smirks, grabs the $20 bill from his hand, and speeds away. Feeling guilty about the accident, Gail invites Paul to her apartment so she can treat his injured arm. But Paul barely notices the pain. All he cares about is finding a way back home. He rushes to Gail's phone and tries calling information for Peter Patzak, hoping to reach someone who can help him. Each time the operator gives him the number, Gail echoes it, causing him to forget it again and again. Frustrated beyond belief, Paul finally snaps and explains that he just wants to get out of downtown and go home. Gail softens and insists on treating his wound since the accident was her fault. While examining his arm, she notices strips of papier-mâché stuck to his skin and decides to borrow some matches from a neighbor to burn them off. Seeing an opportunity, Paul quietly slips out. But Gail catches him on the stairs and offers him another solution. She can drive him home in her Mr. Softy ice cream truck. As they walk toward the truck, Gail notices a flyer taped to a pole. It is Julie's sketch of Paul, labeled as the neighborhood burglar. Without hesitation, Gail blows a whistle to alert the others. Confused, Paul looks around as flashlights shine toward him from every direction, and he runs again. He scrambles up a fire escape and hides in the darkness. But his nightmare continues. Looking through a nearby window, he witnesses a woman shoot her partner during an argument. Terrified that he will somehow be blamed for this too, he climbs back down and returns to the street. Completely exhausted, Paul drops to his knees and shouts in frustration.
What do you want from me? What have I done? Just a word processor, for Christ's sake!
Just then, a man named Mark appears like a lifeline. But when Paul begs for help, Mark mistakes his intentions, thinking Paul is coming on to him. Mark takes him back to his apartment and nervously admits that this would be his first experience with another man. Paul ignores the misunderstanding and immediately uses Mark's phone to call the police. Unfortunately, the officers do not believe his story about an angry mob chasing him and quickly hang up.
Hello?
Oh, wow.
Defeated, Paul asks if he can at least sleep on Mark's sofa. Confused, Mark asks why he does not simply go home. So Paul finally tells him everything that has happened since the night began. While looking out the window, Paul spots Julie taping his sketch to a pole. He calls out to her, but she sees him and quickly pedals away. Only then does he notice the flyers she has posted around the neighborhood with his sketch on them. For the first time, Paul realizes the entire neighborhood believes he is the burglar. Desperate for help, he later finds Tom sitting alone in a diner and begs him to explain the truth to everyone. Tom tells Paul to relax and wait there while he goes to retrieve Paul's apartment keys. Afterward, the cashier places the burger and coffee Paul ordered earlier in front of him, adding even more pressure. Just then, a young punk girl drops an invitation onto Paul's table for a private conceptual art party at Club Berlin. At the same moment, Tom runs into the neighborhood vigilantes and immediately recognizes Paul's sketch. Realizing he has been identified once again, Paul bolts out of the diner before anyone can stop him. Using the invitation, he slips into Club Berlin without any trouble. But the party is nothing like he expected. Almost no one is there. Only a second bartender and a quiet older woman named June sit inside the nearly empty club. With nowhere else to go, Paul asks June to dance. As they move slowly across the floor, June assumes Paul is after her money and asks what he really wants. Paul finally tells the truth. He says he only wants to get home alive and escape the angry mob waiting outside. Understanding his desperation, June takes him down to her basement studio. There, she covers him in papier-mâché and disguises him as a sculpture. Moments later, the vigilantes storm into the club and search every corner. They check the basement carefully, but Paul remains perfectly still. Finding no trace of him and seeing no other way out, the group eventually gives up and leaves. June goes upstairs to make sure the coast is clear. But before she returns, Neil and Pepe break into the basement. Mistaking Paul for the sculpture they lost earlier that night, they load him into their van and drive away. For once, Paul's terrible luck finally works in his favor. As the van speeds through the city, it takes a sharp turn. The rear doors swing open, and Paul tumbles out onto the street. He lands directly in front of his office building in Midtown. Dazed and covered in dried papier-mâché, he slowly stands up and walks inside. He sits at his desk and stares blankly at his computer screen as it powers on, welcoming him to another ordinary workday. At least he made it to work on time. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next recap.